Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jayden Parkinson. Jayden Parkinson was born on September 26, 1996 in Folkestone, UK, as the youngest of three siblings in a troubled family. Her parents' relationship was marked by discord. Jayden's mother, Samantha, recounts that her children were exposed to unsettling experiences. When Jayden was just 7 years old, her parents divorced, and she initially lived with her father. Despite this, she maintained a close bond with her mother, with whom she would talk every night over the phone. As Jayden entered her teenage years, her lifestyle became increasingly turbulent. According to Samantha, Jayden's father gave her excessive freedom, which led to her involvement with a crowd that encouraged smoking and alcohol consumption. Jayden would periodically live with her father and then with her mother. At the age of 13, she ran away from home, seeking refuge with her mother and expressing a desire to live with her. Ultimately, the family court ruled in favor of Jayden's wish, allowing her to stay with her mother. Jayden had a difficult time at school, often clashing with teachers and resenting attempts to control her behavior. In her personal life, she was in a romantic relationship with Ben Blakely, whom she met at 14. Despite their significant age difference, Ben was 20, Jayden's mother was unable to intervene. Initially, Jayden and Ben's relationship was loving and romantic, but it gradually became strained and controlling. Ben exerted significant influence over Jayden's life, dictating her appearance, including what clothes she wore and whether she wore makeup. He also isolated her from her family and friends, causing Jayden to move out of her mother's house and into a hostel for women escaping domestic violence. Ben exerted total control over Jayden's life, despite being banned from her hostel. They frequently argued, and the hostel staff were even warned about Ben's aggressive behavior towards her. Jayden was trapped, needing his permission to do anything. Ben took away her phone, convincing her that she only needed him and his love. Ben dictated who Jayden could talk to, forbidding her from interacting with men. He monitored her social media, and she eventually stopped attending school. His grip on her life was so tight that he even restricted her from leaving her room to use the toilet. Jayden's daily phone calls with her mother dwindled to just 1 or 2 conversations per month. Jayden's mother, Samantha, pleaded with her to return home and end the toxic relationship, but Jayden refused. Ben's control over Jayden was both psychological and physical. She was often seen with bruises on her face. On November 30th, 2013, Jayden called her mother to reveal that she was pregnant. Jayden hoped that having a child would change Ben's attitude towards her and his lifestyle for the better. She thought the baby would bring them closer together and that Ben would go back to being the person she fell in love with. However, Ben did not live up to her expectations. Instead, he revealed his true nature once he had complete control over Jayden. He manipulated her into isolating herself from her friends and family, making her financially dependent on him. He even went so far as to restrict her movements, not allowing her to leave her room, even to use the toilet. Meanwhile, Ben was dating other girls behind her back, controlling them psychologically and physically as well. When Jayden's mother, Samantha, found out about her pregnancy, she asked Jayden to come back home, but Jayden refused, not wanting to cause her mother any more trouble. When Jayden told Ben about her pregnancy, he became angry and denied being the father of her child. Before she vanished, Jayden was being threatened by Ben, who claimed he would post intimate photos and videos of her on social media. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Jayden reported Ben to the authorities, fearing he would follow through on his threat. At the time, Ben possessed 30 explicit photos and 13 videos of Jayden, which she desperately wanted to keep private. On December 3rd, Jayden failed to return to her hostel, prompting staff to launch a search. Given their awareness of Jayden's personal issues, they contacted her mother, Samantha, by phone, but she was unable to provide any information about her daughter's whereabouts. A missing persons report was filed with the police just after midnight on December 4, 2013. After learning about Jayden's tumultuous personal life, investigators reached out to Ben to see if he had any information about her disappearance. However, he was hostile and hung up on them multiple times, claiming he couldn't assist and had no idea where Jayden might be. Jayden had a troubled upbringing and frequently clashed with her family, even running away from home on several occasions. Given this history, her initial disappearance didn't raise immediate red flags during the investigation. On December 4th, police arrested Ben Blakely, but it wasn't related to Jayden's disappearance. Instead, Jayden had previously reported Ben to the police, fearing he would post intimate photos of her online. The investigators who spoke with Ben were unaware that he was also a person of interest in Jayden's disappearance case. After being arrested, Ben denied plans to share Jayden's photos online and was released on bail that same day. Samantha, Jayden's mother, took action by distributing flyers with her daughter's picture and using social media to raise awareness about her disappearance, hoping someone had information about her whereabouts. Meanwhile, the police reviewed surveillance footage to track Jayden's last known movements. They obtained CCTV footage from her hostel, which showed her leaving to meet Ben, but not returning. This was on December 3rd. Further investigation revealed that Jayden was next spotted at Oxford railway station, where CCTV footage captured her walking in with Ben. The footage didn't show anything suspicious. By tracing their journey, investigators discovered that Ben and Jayden took a train to Didcot, a town about 10 miles from Oxford. The last known location of Jayden was at the train station in Didcot, where footage showed her and Ben exiting the building. Jayden would typically reach out to her family within a day or two after running away from home to let them know she was safe. However, this time was different. Despite the passing days, Jayden failed to contact her family or friends, and her social media accounts remained inactive. The CCTV footage showing her boarding a train with Ben made him the prime suspect in her disappearance. The police were convinced that Ben knew Jayden's whereabouts and what had happened to her. The footage also revealed Ben returning to the train station alone, but Jayden was never seen alive again. On December 10, 2013, a week after her disappearance, the police arrested Ben Blakely. The investigators wanted to question Ben to determine what had happened to Jayden after they left the train station in Didcot together. At the time, the police considered two possibilities. Jayden might be hiding, or Ben could be holding her against her will. During the interrogation, Ben was very confident in his responses. He claimed to have no knowledge of his ex-girlfriend Jayden's whereabouts, stating that they had broken up and she had moved on to a new relationship. According to Ben, the police should focus their investigation on her new boyfriend. Ben showed a lack of concern for Jayden's safety, saying he didn't care what happened to her now that they were no longer together and he had a new girlfriend. He suggested that the police check her social media accounts to track her location and identify who she was interacting with. Despite Jayden still being missing, Ben was arrested on suspicion of kidnapping and murder. The police then interviewed Jayden's friends to see if they had any information about her possible whereabouts. However, their investigations revealed that Jayden had become estranged from her friends after starting her relationship with Ben, and therefore, no one knew of a potential hideout. A crucial break in the search for Jayden came when a taxi driver from Didcot contacted investigators. He reported that on December 4th, around 1 a.m., he picked up a young man on a dirt road who was struggling with a large, heavy suitcase covered in mud. The passenger needed help lifting the bag into the taxi, which raised the driver's suspicions about its contents and whether he might have unknowingly witnessed a crime. Further investigation revealed that the passenger had called the taxi using Ben Blakely's mobile phone. When police questioned Ben about this new evidence, he refused to answer any more questions. Analysis of his phone's location records showed that Ben had been to several locations in Didcot, including an abandoned barn in the countryside, which became a key area of interest in the case. The team of investigators, comprising criminologists and dog handlers, visited the location where a taxi had picked up Ben that night to conduct an investigation. It was later discovered that Ben and Jayden had previously been to this area, as Jayden's mother resided in Didcot, which is located near the barn. The police discovered a bracelet similar to Jayden's near the barn. Trained service dogs reacted as if they'd found a body inside, but Jayden's body wasn't there. This led the police to suspect that a suitcase, possibly containing Jayden's body, was involved. The police asked the public to come forward if they'd seen a man carrying a large suitcase in the Didcot area. Meanwhile, they conducted door-to-door interviews with nearby residents. Surveillance footage from the train station showed that Ben and Jayden didn't have a suitcase with them. Investigators were determined to find out where Ben got the suitcase, but they also considered the possibility that the man seen with the suitcase by the taxi driver wasn't actually Ben. On December 14th, the police found a crucial lead in their investigation. Ben Blakely's grandmother, grandfather, and younger brother Jake lived near the abandoned barn where the mysterious events unfolded. When the police arrived at their doorstep, Ben's grandmother immediately asked, "Are you here about the suitcase?" The grandmother explained that Ben had borrowed a suitcase from her a few days prior, hurriedly emptying its contents on the floor without explanation. He returned the suitcase 2 days later, but it was dirty. Additionally, she reported that 2 shovels had gone missing and reappeared, covered in a thick layer of dirt. The presence of the dirt-covered shovels raised suspicions that Ben may not have acted alone. Moreover, Jake, Ben's 17-year-old brother, was revealed to be a friend of Jayden's, which hinted at a potential connection between them. Witnesses reported seeing Ben and Jake riding dirt bikes together around the time the police were searching for Jayden. The police arrested Jake Blakely on suspicion of being involved in the crime. They sent the suitcase Ben had returned to his grandmother's barn to a laboratory for analysis to see if it had any traces of Jayden's DNA. Based on the evidence, investigators developed a theory that Jayden was killed in an abandoned barn, then placed in a suitcase and taken to another location where she was buried. However, searching the vast fields surrounding Didcot made finding her body a daunting task. To aid in the investigation, the police used aerial photography to identify 10 areas where the soil surface had recently been disturbed. They checked several locations, but didn't find Jayden's body until they had searched all 10 areas of interest. A significant development occurred in the case when Jake Blakely began cooperating with the police. He directed them to investigate his uncle's grave at a local cemetery in Didcot, near the All Saints Church. Although the cemetery was one of 10 locations that had recently shown signs of surface disturbance, it was initially considered a low priority since such changes are not unusual in a cemetery setting. However, after receiving a note from Jake Blakely suggesting that Jayden's body might be buried in his uncle's grave, the police cordoned off the cemetery. This was a completely new and unprecedented tactic in hiding a victim's body, and it drew widespread media attention. Ben and Jake Blakely's uncle had been buried in 2006, and the forensic team set up a tent in the cemetery to conduct their investigation. After some time, they made the grim discovery. Jayden's body was found in the grave, naked, with no clothes or jewelry present. This was the first time in the country that a victim's body had been hidden in an existing grave. An examination by forensic experts revealed that Jayden was beaten before her death, with evidence of strangulation and finger marks on her neck. The official cause of death was asphyxia, as determined by the pathologist. While in prison awaiting trial, Ben Blakely had a change of heart after speaking with the prison chaplain. He wrote a letter, along with his lawyer, admitting responsibility for Jayden's death. Ben claimed that the crime was not planned, stating that he pushed Jayden during an argument, causing her to fall from a nearby bridge. He attempted to revive her but was unsuccessful. Initially, he buried her body in one location, but later moved it to his uncle's grave in the cemetery. However, the autopsy contradicted his story, showing blunt force injuries to her face and asphyxia as the cause of death, with no signs of a fall from a height. It meant Ben Blakely was dishonest to avoid responsibility for his actions. However, the truth came to light during the trial, which started on June 23, 2014, after Jaden's father had passed away due to heart problems. Blakely showed no remorse for taking the lives of Jaden and her unborn child. Instead, he behaved defiantly, shouting insults and displaying his indifference. Throughout the 4-week trial, it became clear that Blakely was a violent and controlling boyfriend. 3 of his ex-girlfriends testified that he had been abusive to them, taking their phones, hitting them, and choking them if they answered back, or if he suspected them of cheating. Blakely's short temper was on full display during the trial. He frequently outbursted in anger, using foul language in the courtroom and shouting at the prosecutor, Richard Leem. The judge repeatedly warned him about his behavior, but it was too much for Jaden's mother and other family members who were often forced to leave the courtroom in tears. Judge Patrick Eccles was shocked by Ben's behavior, so he sent him to the cells and continued the trial without him for a day. Although Jake Blakely is under 18, Judge Eccles allowed his name to be published because it was in the public's best interest. Jake has admitted to trying to disrupt the legal process, but claimed he thought he was burying weapons or dead animals at the time. Ben promised his sibling Jake an Xbox and £100 to commit the crime. CCTV footage showed Ben and Jaden taking a train to Didcot, then Jake returning alone, hiding his face. The prosecutor said it was a planned crime, with Jake luring Jaden to a secluded spot to kill him. Blakely took Jaden to an abandoned barn in another town after finding out she was pregnant, likely because he wanted to control her and didn't want to become a father. Jaden wanted to start a new life, but Blakely wouldn't let her go. Jaden's mother, Samantha, supported creating a domestic violence registry in an interview with Sky News. She recalled how Blakely manipulated and controlled Jaden, getting money from her, and said she thought she was his target, not Jaden. The jury deliberated for 20 hours before reaching a verdict. Ben Blakely was guilty of intentionally killing Jaden Parkinson. The judge emphasized that Jake Blakely's abusive behavior towards Jaden involved physical and emotional mistreatment during their relationship. Blakely controlled every aspect of Jaden's daily life, taking away her phone to isolate her from others. When she was living at a hostel, he forced her to stay in her room, even restricting her access to the bathroom. The judge pointed out that Jaden was deeply emotionally attached to Blakely, making it challenging for her to break free from the toxic relationship. Finally, in November last year, Jaden found the courage to end the relationship. In response, Blakely threatened to post intimate photos of her online to humiliate her. The court sentenced Jake Blakely to 3 years in prison for attempting to pervert the course of justice in July 2014. His older brother, Ben Blakely, received a life sentence with a minimum term of 20 years. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Alicia Canales McGuire. Alicia was born on October 29, 1992, in Mount Vernon, Washington, to Manuel and Michelle Canales. Her passion was helping others, which led her to work as a caregiver for most of her adult life. Growing up on a farm, Alicia learned the value of hard work from a young age. Starting to work at just 5 years old, she often returned to the family farm to lend a hand. Spending time with her family was crucial to Alicia, and she made it a point to regularly visit and call them, always remembering to express her love when saying goodbye. Alicia lived in Birdsview with her husband Bradle. Alicia lived in the house her sister Amanda's home, where Amanda lived with her 3 children. When Amanda had to travel to New York for work, she asked Alicia to watch her kids during her absence. Alicia was happy to help care for her nephew and nieces. One night, A nanny staying in the house with her called 911 after waking up to the sound of gunshots. When the nanny went downstairs, she found Alicia lying motionless at the front door. The police officers who arrived at the scene first secured the house to ensure the perpetrator was not still inside. They carefully checked every room, confirming that only the nanny and the children were present. Once the children were safely removed from the house, the police began searching for evidence. A car was parked in front of the house, with shell casings nearby, indicating that the shooter had stood next to the car right before the front door. Several bullets had hit the door frame, and Alicia's body was lying face down just outside the door. The police found no signs of a robbery, as the house was not in disarray, and it appeared that the perpetrator had not entered the house at all. The detectives were left wondering who would want to kill Alicia and why. When they discovered that the crime scene was her sister's house, they considered the possibility of mistaken identity. Maybe Amanda, Alicia's sister, was the intended target, but she was safely in New York at the time. The investigators turned to the nanny, who was also in the house during the shooting, for answers. After calming down, she was able to provide some information. She told them that she was upstairs when she heard the gunshots, and when she looked down, she saw Alicia lying face down on the floor, motionless. Unfortunately, she didn't see the shooter. She mentioned that Amanda, Alicia's sister, had issues with her ex-husband, Kevin Lewis. Upon reviewing reports from the local sheriff's office, the detectives discovered that this was not the first call to the address, with all previous incidents related to domestic disputes between Amanda and Kevin Lewis. The detectives focus on this particular testimony. They located Kevin Lewis's home address in another part of Everett and paid him a visit before dawn. His house was dark, and when they knocked on the door, Kevin answered. During their conversation, the officers asked if he knew where his ex-wife was, and he replied that she should be at home. Appearing disheveled as if he had just woken up, the detectives asked Kevin to account for his whereabouts the previous night. He claimed to have stayed at home and stated that his sister and mother could vouch for his alibi. Notably, he didn't ask why the detectives were visiting him. When detectives told Kevin that a shooting had occurred at the house where his children lived, he showed no emotional response, which was unusual. As a parent, he should have asked about his children's well-being, but he remained silent. However, when they informed him that Amanda was out of town on business, he expressed surprise, saying "really," and the conversation ended there. The detectives decided to investigate further by reviewing footage from surveillance cameras at neighboring houses. They wanted to verify Kevin's alibi that he had stayed home all night. They saw a car stopped near Kevin's driveway about 40 minutes before the attack on Alicia. A person resembling Kevin then exited the house, got into the car, and drove away a few moments later. Although the footage was not clear enough to confirm it was definitely Kevin, the detectives continued to review additional camera footage. They took a closer look at the car, but that didn't help identify it. All they could determine was that it was a light-colored vehicle. They fast-forwarded the recording and saw the car return about 20 minutes later. This time, they noticed a crucial detail. The front right rim was different from the others. While the three other rims were light in color, the front right one was dark. The car stopped near Kevin Lewis's house, and the same person who had gotten out of the car earlier got out again and went back inside. Whoever this person was, they entered the house about 20 minutes before the 911 calls about a shooting started coming in. After that, the car left and didn't come back. Since it was a 15-minute drive from Kevin's house to Amanda's house, it's possible that the car had enough time to get to Amanda's place. However, it was too early to say whether this car was involved in the shooting at all. Amanda found out about her sister's death a few hours later, when their father called her in New York to break the news. When investigators asked Amanda, a key witness, if she thought her ex-husband Kevin was responsible for Alicia's murder, she was adamant that he was the one. Although Amanda's 8-year marriage to Kevin Lewis ended, she struggled to acknowledge the toxic nature of their relationship. Despite their divorce in June 2017, Amanda lived in fear of Kevin, who had physically abused her in the past, leaving her with bruises. After their separation, Kevin continued to threaten her. In August 2017, Amanda was granted full custody of their 3 young children, and Kevin was ordered to provide $800 in monthly support instead of child support. This marked a fresh start for Amanda, who focused on rebuilding her life in Everett, Washington, and was grateful for the support of her family as a single mother. Kevin, a former military man, threatened to kill Amanda, and she took him seriously due to his training. Believing she was the target, Amanda obtained a restraining order against Kevin, but he violated it multiple times. He would often lurk around her house, peeking through the windows, which terrified not only Amanda, but also her 3 children. Despite the violations, Kevin was never charged by the police. Weeks before her sister's tragic death, Amanda was brutally beaten in her own driveway. She was getting out of her car late one night when someone launched a surprise attack. Although the assault happened quickly and she didn't see the attacker's face, Amanda was convinced that Kevin was behind it. Investigators believe 30-year-old Kevin Lewis is the prime suspect in the murder of Alicia. They think he intended to kill his ex-wife, but he was unaware that she was in New York at the time. Unbeknownst to him, Amanda had asked Alicia to babysit her children while she was away. However, there's a problem with this theory. If Kevin was the person in the footage, it would mean he was at his home during the shooting. Moreover, his sister and mother have provided him with a solid alibi. As a result, the police have continued their investigation, exploring alternative explanations for the crime. They returned to Amanda's house to re-examine the crime scene and track the path of the bullets. The investigation revealed that Alicia was shot when the door was only partially open. The shooter fired at least 7 shots from outside the house, which entered the interior. The evidence suggests that the shooter stood next to the garage and fired, then moved towards the door and fired again from inside. The medical examiner determined that Alicia died from multiple gunshot wounds to the head and torso, with 5 shots hitting her. 2 of the wounds showed signs of gunpowder residue, indicating close-range shots. While the examiner couldn't determine the exact order of the 5 shots, they believe the last 2 head wounds were likely the final 2 inflicted. Furthermore, experts concluded that the 7 shell casings found at the scene came from the same gun. Alicia's head wounds were caused by close-range bullet shots. The investigators explored the possibility of a personal motive behind her murder, but found no evidence to support this theory. The shell casings discovered at the crime scene were a rare Russian-made brand called Tul Ammo, which gave the police hope of tracing the seller and buyer. The police learned that Walmart had sold the 9mm Tul Ammo cartridges and had CCTV footage of the purchase. Upon reviewing the footage recorded 2 days before Alicia's death, they initially suspected Kevin Lewis as the buyer. However, the footage revealed a different person who paid using a credit card. The police identified this individual, but found no connection to Kevin Lewis, Alicia, or the nanny. The investigation thus required new leads and evidence. Amanda was questioned by investigators about her relationship with Kevin. She revealed that their relationship started well, but Kevin eventually became aggressive and violent, leading to their divorce, a restraining order, and Amanda gaining full custody of their children. Despite this, Amanda believed that she was the intended target of the shooting that killed Alicia, not Alicia herself. She suspected that Lewis had orchestrated the attack, but investigators knew that Kevin was at home at the time of the shooting. Upon re-examining the footage from the night of Alicia's death, investigators noticed something they had previously overlooked. The low-quality recording showed Kevin leaving his house and getting into the back seat of a car behind the driver. This raised questions, as most people would typically sit in the front passenger seat. The likely explanation was that someone else was already sitting in the front passenger seat, meaning there were probably two people in the car by the time it arrived at Kevin's house. This new evidence didn't directly link Kevin to Alicia's death, but it did contribute to the growing case against him for attacking his ex-wife Amanda. In November 2018, Kevin was arrested and later sentenced to 3 years in prison. Over a year had passed since Alicia's tragic death, yet her case remained a mystery. However, a breakthrough finally came in 2019 when the police station received a crucial call from a woman with vital information. The caller claimed to have met a girl named Angelica at a party in nearby Spokane, who boasted about being hired to commit a murder on York Road, the same road where Alicia was fatally shot. Although the police were initially skeptical, given the significant distance of 5 hours between Spokane and Everett. According to the caller, Angelica had proudly shared details about how she and her boyfriend were involved in the crime. Alexis Hale, alias Angelica, claimed a woman was fatally shot in the head, saying the killer was hired by the children's father and mistakenly targeted the wrong person. Police were interested in her detailed knowledge of the case. They discovered her true identity, found social media photos of her with a 9mm pistol, and videos featuring her boyfriend, Jadon Phelps. A video posted by Alexis on the night of the murder helped investigators pinpoint her location, about 10 minutes from Kevin Lewis's house. Jadon boasted about a large sum of money on social media, leading police to discover his connection to Kevin through his aunt. With this evidence, they made an arrest. The first person to be taken into custody was Alexis Hale, who protested loudly, claiming she was only 17 and couldn't be arrested. However, she knew why she was being arrested and demanded a lawyer. Police arrested Jadon Phelps, analyzing his and Hale's phone records, showing they drove from Spokane to Everett to commit the shooting. Security footage from Lewis's neighbors revealed someone in a white top leaving and returning around the time of the crime. Lewis was wearing a white top when questioned. Phelps, in custody, revealed Kevin Lewis hired him and Hale and led police through the crime scene, pointing out the door and corner. He stood where he was positioned during the crime, reenacting the events, and admitted to shooting at the door when it opened slightly, then firing 2 more shots before fleeing. Kevin Lewis was already in jail for a crime when he was arrested and charged with aggravated murder with a firearm, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation to commit murder in connection with the September 2017 death of Alicia. In July 2020, 20-year-old Phelps pleaded guilty to premeditated first-degree murder and was sentenced to 31 years in prison. His co-defendant, 18-year-old Hale, also pleaded guilty to the same charge and received a 15-year sentence. During the trial, Phelps testified that he committed the crime for financial gain and to increase his reputation on the streets. He used the money Lewis paid him to get tattoos, purchase a pair of Timberland boots, and buy a Ferragamo belt buckle. Phelps claimed that his former girlfriend had obtained the gun used in the crime from a family member, and he had given her $200. Lewis pleaded not guilty and faced trial. Prosecutors alleged he paid $2,400 to his cousin and girlfriend to kill his ex-wife, but they mistakenly targeted Alicia. Lewis directed them to the address, claiming he didn't know the target. Phelps and Hale exited their vehicle, with Phelps stopping near the garage and Hale knocking on the door. As Alicia opened it, Phelps fired multiple shots, eventually walking up to the porch, and they fled. They returned, fearing they left a glove, but saw police and drove away. Finally, Judge Thompson also ordered Lewis to no longer have any contact with his ex-wife, his children, and Phelps and Hale for the rest of his life. Records indicate that he remains incarcerated at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla County. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Drew Shoden. Drew Katrina Shoden was born on September 26, 1981, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, to Alan and Linda Shoden. She had an older brother, Sven, When Drew was 3, her parents divorced, but they remained on good terms. Her mother later married Sid Walker, a travel agent, and they raised Drew and her brother in a comfortable home on Whitefish Lake, a scenic vacation spot in Minnesota. Throughout high school, Drew excelled academically, earning honors and developed a passion for golf and art. Her true love was art, and her room was filled with her sketches of rock stars, models, and friends. After graduating from high school, Drew attended the University of North Dakota in Grand Forks. Those who knew her described her as a lively and caring person who loved to help others. She enjoyed traveling and exploring the country, with a dream of visiting Australia. In fact, she had plans to travel there in the spring of 2004. Before the event, Drew had 2 part-time jobs to save money. She worked as a sales associate at Victoria's Secret and as a waitress at a nightclub in Grand Forks. On Saturday, November 22, 2003, Drew finished her 4 p.m. shift at Victoria's Secret in Columbia Mall. She then went shopping and bought a purse from a store. After shopping, Drew walked to her car in the parking lot and called her boyfriend, Chris Lang. During the call, Drew suddenly said, "Okay, okay," and their connection was lost. Chris didn't think much of it since their conversation wasn't important, so he didn't call her back. About 3 hours later, Chris's phone rang again. When he answered, he only heard the sound of wind and phone buttons beeping. In a later television interview, Chris recalled his thoughts when the call with Drew was interrupted. At the time, he didn't sense any urgency and didn't imagine that something terrible was happening. He thought it was just a typical cell phone disconnection. It wasn't until later that he realized the call had been cut off for a much more sinister reason. Drew didn't show up for work at a nightclub, causing her colleagues to worry. Around the same time, her friend and roommate Meg Murphy got a call from the nightclub asking about Drew's whereabouts. Meg didn't know where Drew was and started searching for her by contacting their mutual friends and the local hospital, but she didn't find any leads. By 9 p.m., with no progress, Meg contacted the police, telling them that Drew worked at Columbia Mall. The police sent an officer to the mall, but it was already closed by the time they arrived. While searching the parking lot, the officer found Drew's car. When they inspected the vehicle, they discovered it was unlocked and showed no signs of a struggle or any evidence of a crime. However, they did find a black knife sheath on the ground near the car. The car's interior showed no evidence of theft, with personal belongings including papers, a wallet, and a newly purchased purse still on the seat, indicating that robbery was unlikely to be a motive for any trouble Drew might have encountered. With Drew's friends, boyfriend, and parents unaware of her whereabouts, investigators suspected a possible kidnapping. The investigation initially focused on Chris Lang as the prime suspect, but he was quickly ruled out after it was confirmed that he had a solid alibi, having been 300 miles away in Minnesota at the time of the incident. The police obtained information from Chris about 2 phone calls he had with Drew. The first call was suddenly cut off, and the second call, which took place a few hours later, picked up background noises, including wind sounds and button pressing. The investigators went to the mall where Drew worked the next day to review the security footage. Although there were no cameras in the parking lot where Drew's car was parked, there were multiple cameras inside the mall. Upon reviewing the footage, detectives found a clip of Drew entering a store after her shift. At 4:55 p.m., she calmly purchased a purse, wearing a pink sweater and holding a jacket. After paying, she put on her jacket and left the store, calling Chris on her way out. This call was made at exactly 5 p.m. As we know, their conversation was suddenly interrupted at 5:04 p.m. after Drew said, "Okay, okay." To recreate the events surrounding Drew's disappearance, a detective conducted an experiment. He set a timer for 4 minutes, the length of the interrupted call, and walked from the store where Drew bought her purse to the parking lot where her car was parked. When the timer went off, the detective had reached the parking lot near where Drew's car was found. This suggested that something must have happened to Drew while she was at her car. The investigation was hindered by the lack of surveillance cameras in the parking lot. Despite this challenge, Drew's disappearance generated widespread media attention, prompting a massive response from the public. Alongside the police, over 1,000 volunteers joined the search for Drew, and FBI officers were also involved in the investigation. Drew's last phone call was traced to Fisher, Minnesota, a 30-minute drive from her workplace. The surrounding area is rural, with vast fields. To search for clues, police used helicopters, all-terrain vehicles, horses, and dogs to scour the fields. They also asked local landowners to check their properties, but this initial search yielded no leads. As the investigation continued, the search area expanded daily. 4 days later, a boot was found under a bridge in Crookston, a small town about 30 miles from Grand Forks, where Drew vanished. Notably, a roommate remembered Drew wearing those boots on the day she disappeared. Forensic analysis later confirmed the boot belonged to Drew. In the Crookston area, further searches yielded no new leads, so the investigation turned its focus back to the Columbia Mall surveillance footage. This time, detectives scrutinized hundreds of hours of footage from various cameras, searching for signs of the abductor. They suspected that the person responsible might have been following Drew and could be visible in the footage. After hours of monitoring, the investigators identified a suspicious individual. The man was seen wandering aimlessly around the mall, not purchasing anything, and appeared more interested in observing the people around him than the products on sale. At 3:41 p.m., he sat down on a bench near the mall exit, continuing to watch people pass by. About 10 minutes later, he got up and walked away, wearing black gloves on his hands. After observing the man stand up and leave his seat, investigators made a crucial connection that he only did so when a blonde woman, pushing a grocery cart, walked by him and headed towards the parking lot. The detectives were convinced that this was not a mere coincidence, but rather the man had deliberately selected a potential target and was now following her. The police had no leads on the mysterious woman who was almost kidnapped at the mall, but Drew Shoden was the only person who vanished that day. Given their resemblance, it's possible the kidnapper had a specific type in mind, and so Drew was the next target. Drew left the mall around 5 p.m. when it was already dark, which could have made it easier for the perpetrator to strike. The investigation focused on 3 key locations: Grand Forks, where Drew was kidnapped; Fisher, where her phone was last active; and Crookston, where one of her shoes was found. The FBI reviewed the files of all registered sex offenders in these areas, comparing their photos to the image of the suspicious man from the mall. The only individual who fit the description was Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., a man with a criminal record marked by repeated offenses against women. Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., now 50, has spent 23 years in prison. He was born in Laredo, Texas, in 1953 to migrant worker parents. He was the second of 5 children. Rodriguez described his childhood as unhappy, citing his parents' excessive criticism and unreasonableness. For 15 years, his family moved from state to state before settling in Crookston in 1963. As he grew older, Rodriguez became increasingly isolated, partly due to language barriers. As a Spanish speaker, he struggled with English, making school challenging. He dropped out in the 9th grade and began working as a laborer at the American Crystal Sugar Company plant in Crookston. Rodriguez alleged that he was molested by older women during his youth, which he believed sparked his hostility towards women. In 1974, at 21, he asked a woman for a ride home, but instead took her to a driveway in Crookston, where he attacked her, grabbing her throat and trying to force her into submission. The following month, Rodriguez targeted another woman who was sitting in a parked truck outside a movie theater in Crookston. He threatened her with a knife and instructed her to follow him to a secluded rural area where he sexually assaulted her. In 1979, Rodriguez attempted to abduct a 69-year-old high school English teacher who was walking alone at night in Crookston. When he tried to force her into his car, she resisted. Enraged, Rodriguez stabbed her in the elbow and abdomen with a knife. Despite her injuries, she managed to escape and ran to safety. The teacher, who was also a skilled artist, created a composite sketch of Rodriguez that closely resembled him. This sketch ultimately led to his arrest. Rodriguez was found guilty of attempted kidnapping and aggravated assault, and he was sentenced to 23 years in prison. He served his sentence until his release in May 2003. Notably, Rodriguez was released from prison just 6 months before Drew's disappearance, and he was registered as a high-risk sex offender, indicating that he was likely to reoffend. Alfonso Rodriguez's family expressed concerns to the Minnesota Department of Corrections that he might revert to his old ways before his prison release. But he was released since he had served his full sentence. After his release, Rodriguez moved in with his mother in Crookston, near the bridge where Drew's shoe was found, which wasn't in his favor. Detectives questioned Rodriguez, who denied any involvement in Drew's disappearance. He claimed to have visited the Columbia Mall on the day she vanished, saying he watched the movie Once Upon a Time in Mexico at the movie theater. However, investigators discovered that no Grand Forks movie theaters were showing that film on that day. After searching Rodriguez's car, the police came to a sad realization: Drew was probably no longer alive. According to Grand Forks County Sheriff Dan Hill, the search had shifted from a rescue mission to a recovery effort. In the interior of Rodriguez's car, forensic experts discovered dark red stains in several areas, which were later confirmed to be Drew's blood. The blood was found on the rear passenger window, back seat, and 2 other areas in the passenger compartment. The DNA from the blood matched Drew's DNA, which was obtained from her toothbrush. A folding knife was found in the trunk of Rodriguez's car, which matched the sheath found in the parking lot near Drew's vehicle. A receipt showed that Rodriguez had purchased the knife and sheath from a nearby hardware store. Although Drew's body was not found, the evidence was sufficient to charge Rodriguez with her disappearance 8 days later. Rodriguez was arrested and held in a Grand Forks jail. He denied any involvement in Drew's disappearance and refused to cooperate with investigators. Despite the evidence against him, he refused to provide any information about Drew's whereabouts. During a brief bond hearing, his bail was set at $5 million. The search for Drew persisted despite the suspect's silence, focusing on 3 towns. However, the search was hampered by heavy, unprecedented snowfall in the area. To aid in the search, the governors of North Dakota and Minnesota held a press conference on December 9th, pledging to deploy several hundred National Guard members and state employees. North Dakota Governor John Hoeven expressed that Drew's disappearance had affected every North Dakotan, while Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty commended the community and police for their cooperation. Despite their efforts, no results were found, and the search was eventually suspended due to deteriorating weather conditions. When spring arrived, the search resumed with renewed intensity. As the winter snow began to melt, searchers hoped to finally find Drew after 5 long months. Unfortunately, it wasn't until April 17, 2004, that her body was discovered in a field in Crookston, just a few miles from where the boot was initially found. Drew's family was devastated when they received the heartbreaking news. Her father described the moment, saying that they had been waiting for that call, and when it came, it felt like time had stopped. This was their worst fear come true, and it would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The body was found in a field that had already been searched, but the large snowdrifts had concealed it. The circumstances of the crime were immediately apparent. Drew was naked from the waist down, her hands were tied behind her back, and a rope was around her neck. There were also signs of a plastic bag having been placed over her head before the rope was tied. DNA evidence linked to Rodriguez was found on Drew's jacket. An autopsy revealed that she had been subjected to a brutal beating and stabbing before her death. The medical examiner identified 3 possible causes of death: the neck wound, suffocation, or hypothermia. Drew Chaudin's family was finally able to say goodbye to her On April 24, 2004, after months of uncertainty, a mourning ceremony in North Dakota was attended by around 1,500 people. The crime involved both North Dakota and Minnesota, which made it a federal crime since Drew was taken across state lines. This meant the prosecutor's office could pursue the death penalty for Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. Rodriguez was found guilty of Drew's murder on August 30, 2006, and the jury recommended the death sentence. Judge Ralph Erickson sentenced him to death on February 8, 2007, citing the senseless and violent nature of his crime. Notably, Rodriguez became the first person to be sentenced to death in North Dakota in almost a century. However, even after 6 years on death row, Rodriguez refused to admit his guilt. It wasn't until June 28, 2013, that he finally confessed to kidnapping and killing Drew. But the story is not over yet. Ralph Erickson, a former district judge, became a U.S. Court of Appeals judge and later reversed his own decision that had sentenced Rodriguez to death. In 2021, he ordered a new sentencing phase, emphasized that Rodriguez's guilt was clear and question, confirmed by multiple DNA tests. The issue at hand is the appropriateness of the death penalty in this case. Erickson overturned the death sentence, citing two key reasons. Firstly, the defense attorneys failed to thoroughly investigate Rodriguez's mental health. Secondly, forensic expert Michael McGee's testimony was misleading. McGee claimed that Rodriguez had violated Drew's sexual integrity within 24 to 36 hours of her abduction, but there was no concrete evidence to support this, such as Rodriguez's seminal fluid on Drew's body. According to Erickson, McGee's opinion was not based on facts and misled him, influencing his original verdict. Despite reversing the death sentence, Erickson noted that the circumstances of Drew's body being found naked below the waist with her hands tied behind her back suggested a sexually motivated crime, even without Rodriguez's seminal fluid being present. Judge Erickson ruled that Alfonso Rodriguez's constitutional rights were violated because his mental health was not properly examined, both in general and at the time of his crime. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Amato family. Margaret and Chad Robert Amato got married in the mid-1900s. At the time, Margaret had a 3-year-old son named Jason from a previous marriage. Chad was not deterred by this and was willing to raise Jason as his own. They had 2 more sons, Grant and Cody. Grant was very shy and found it difficult to make friends, so he relied on his brothers for companionship. As he grew up, Grant remained modest and introverted, still struggling to connect with his peers. After their eldest brother Jason left home, Grant became especially close to Cody. The 2 brothers pursued medical degrees together and eventually became anesthesiologists. However, Grant often made mistakes and needed Cody to double-check his work. In August 2018, Cody took a break from work and decided to travel the world for a change of scenery. He dreamed of visiting Japan and invited Grant and their best friend, Jeremy, to join him on the journey. Grant became fixated on a mysterious webcam model named Sylvie, aka Sylvia Vanessa Lavova from Bulgaria, after meeting her on a website where he paid for private online interactions with various women. He began to believe that Sylvie genuinely cared for him and that they could have a real relationship. To ensure her loyalty, Grant spent thousands of dollars daily and showered her with expensive gifts such as lingerie and jewelry, which she would wear during their video calls. Desperate to impress Sylvie, Grant fabricated stories and lost touch with reality. He lied about living alone in a large house, owning a successful business, and having the ability to lavish her with money. To back up his claims, Grant sent her large sums of money, starting with a few thousand, then $10,000, and eventually $100,000 as a birthday gift. Grant's excessive spending from his parents' accounts eventually caught their attention. At first, he claimed it was for his online project, but Chad and Margaret soon realized he was lying. This led to a major family argument, with his father demanding he leave the house immediately. However, his mother and Cody intervened on his behalf. The family recognized that Grant was struggling with severe internet addiction, yet they were shocked to discover that he had spent nearly $200,000 from their accounts. A search of his room revealed vials of potent substances, which Grant claimed he used to cope with the emotional strain. His parents decided to cut off his access to their accounts and planned to send him to a rehabilitation clinic for treatment of his drug and internet addictions. Feeling desperate, Grant threatened to end his life. He stormed out of the house, got into his car, and sped away. It was later discovered that Grant had driven to his aunt and uncle's house, damaging their fence and garage wall in the process. His relatives, aware of the turmoil within the Amato family, took pity on him and offered him a place to stay until things calmed down. Grant's parents asked him to stop seeing Sylvie, but he didn't listen. Instead, he stole thousands of dollars from his kind relatives to pay for his interactions with her. When his aunt found out, she told his parents, who promised to handle the situation and get the stolen money back if she didn't call the police. Chad, Grant's father, went to the relative's house and took Grant, who desperately needed help. Chad, along with Margaret and Cody, realized that talking to Grant wasn't working and that if he left home, he would likely steal again. So, they gave him an ultimatum. Either he would go to a rehab clinic to get treatment for his addiction, or he would face jail time for theft. Grant reluctantly agreed to enter the clinic, where he would spend 2 months away from temptations. Grant was admitted to a medical institution in December 2018 to receive treatment for his drug and internet addictions. While he was in treatment, his parents accessed his computer and were shocked to discover that he had been spending thousands of dollars a day from their family accounts on a woman named Sylvie. They found intimate online interactions between Grant and Sylvie, which Grant had recorded and repeatedly watched. Grant's parents decided to contact Sylvie and inform her that the man who had been showering her with gifts and money was not a successful businessman, but rather an unemployed addict who had stolen the funds from his family. They warned Sylvie that Grant could face criminal charges for his actions. However, Sylvie was unmoved, viewing her interactions with Grant as simply a job and refusing to return the stolen money. On January 5, 2019, Grant suddenly returned home from treatment, having completed less than a quarter of the rehabilitation program. He had fled the clinic, where he had shown complete non-compliance with the program. Grant tearfully promised to turn his life around and get a job, but threatened to end his life if his parents forced him to return to the rehab center. His parents agreed to let him stay home, but only under strict conditions. Grant was on a tight leash, no computer use, a strict daily routine, and close monitoring of his earnings. To help him get back on track, he was given a part-time job at a local grocery warehouse, which he held for about 3 weeks. Grant appeared to be cooperative, leading his parents to believe he had overcome his addictions and matured. However, on Thursday, January 24, 2019, Grant convinced his mother to let him use the laptop for a short time to check his email and post his resume online, hoping to find a better job than his current warehouse position. Margaret trusted her son and allowed him to use the laptop, a decision that would prove to be a critical mistake. As soon as Grant got online, he tried to contact Sylvie, but he discovered that his parents had already exposed the truth about him to her. Feeling betrayed, Grant believed his parents had humiliated him in front of the only woman he loved, and he sought revenge. Grant's anger turned deadly when he remembered the guns his family kept at home. While his father had locked the main collection in a safe, Grant knew about another loaded gun kept in his parents' bedroom. This was the gun he decided to use to take brutal revenge on his family. Grant's mother was working on the computer in the home office when her youngest son, Grant, sneaked up behind her and shot her in the back of the head. She didn't even have time to turn around or realize what was happening. Next, Grant waited for his father to come home from work. As soon as he walked into the kitchen, Grant shot him twice in the chest. Grant then thought of an even more sinister plan. He decided to blame his own brother, Cody, who had always been supportive and helpful towards him and was his best friend. Cody had moved out of the family home and was living with his girlfriend. Grant used his deceased father's phone to send Cody messages, telling him to come home right away because something terrible had happened. Grant gave his brother only a little information, trusting it would be enough to make him leave work immediately. Grant was right. Cody rushed home from work, even leaving early. As soon as Cody entered the house, he made his way to the bottom of the staircase that led to the second floor. But before he could go any further, he was shot and fell to the ground. Cody didn't die right away. He had time to understand the terrible situation he was in, but he was unable to do anything to change it. Grant murdered his family and then carefully covered his tracks. He wiped his fingerprints from the pistol, placed it in his brother's hand to frame him, and left it next to the bodies to make it seem like Cody had killed their parents and then taken his own life. Grant then calmly packed his belongings, downloaded incriminating video files from the computer, and even sent a text to Sylvie to tie up loose ends. He loaded his essentials into the car and drove away. However, the police quickly tracked him down and arrested him at a small motel in Orange County just over a day later. Grant was more disappointed than surprised, but he vehemently denied any involvement during his interrogation. Grant fabricated outlandish stories about his father's alleged cruelty towards him, his mother, and brother, claiming his father tried to keep him apart from his girlfriend Sylvie, whom he claimed to truly love. His account of the events on the evening of January 24, 2019, was confusing, inconsistent, and lacked credibility. Grant claimed that his brother Cody got into a fight with their father, grabbed a gun, and accidentally killed Chad and Margaret. However, Grant wasn't present during the incident and only pieced together the events based on what he thought might have happened. Grant said he was kicked out of the house by his father and spent the night in his car. The next morning, he drove away without knowing what had occurred at home. However, his story had many inconsistencies and didn't add up. The evidence suggested that Grant was the one who had killed his family members. As a result, Grant was arrested and charged with the murder of his father, brother, and Margaret. He was held in custody on a $750,000 bond, which he couldn't afford to pay. The trial began on July 15, 2019. Almost all the witnesses who testified, including Grant's brother Jason, relatives, and Cody's friend Jeremy, spoke against Grant. Those who knew him described Grant as a person with addiction problems, a compulsive liar, and a thief. He had even stolen money from Jeremy during their trip to Japan. The key evidence against Grant was a large bank transfer from his brother Chad's account to his own younger son's account, which took place late at night after the family members had been murdered. To authorize the transfer, Grant had used the finger of his deceased father to bypass the account's biometric identification system. The prosecution sought the death penalty, arguing that Grant's actions were premeditated and heinous. However, the defense claimed that Grant was mentally ill and required treatment rather than punishment. On August 12, 2019, the court delivered its verdict, finding 30-year-old Grant Amato guilty of 3 premeditated murders. As a result, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Elizabeth Arellano. Elizabeth Paula Arellano was born on August 16, 1987, in Fort Worth, Texas, where she spent her entire life. She grew up with her 2 sisters, Alessandra and Giovanna, and the 3 were incredibly close. After her biological father left the family when she was very young, her mother, Juanita, remarried a man named Fidel, who adopted Elizabeth and her sisters, treating them as his own. Elizabeth had a warm and loving relationship with her stepfather, who supported her in all her endeavors. She was a diligent student and dreamed of becoming a doctor one day. In high school, she met Rudolph Arellano, who was almost 8 years older than her, and the two began a romantic relationship. Although her parents were initially hesitant about their age difference, they trusted Rudolph and allowed the relationship to continue. At 16, Elizabeth married Rudolph and soon had 4 children, 3 sons, and a daughter. However, she didn't plan to give up her career aspirations to become a full-time mother. She pursued her childhood dream, graduating from medical school and working as a paramedic, with hopes of furthering her education to become a doctor. Elizabeth was a kind and pious woman, raised in a Christian tradition. She was devoted to her children and instilled in them the importance of loving and helping others. Those close to her described her as a caring and responsive person, always willing to lend a helping hand. From the outside, her marriage to Rudolph appeared to be strong and happy, but beneath the surface, it was struggling. Rudolph's jealousy and controlling behavior had been a problem for years, and over time, it became increasingly unbearable. In the spring of 2016, Elizabeth finally reached her breaking point after another jealous outburst from her husband. Taking her children with her, she moved back to her parents' house. Rudolph attempted to reconcile, but Elizabeth was exhausted from tolerating his anger and didn't want her children to witness the constant fighting. So, she found the courage to file for divorce. Shortly after, Elizabeth mysteriously disappeared. According to her friends and family, she had been in good spirits and had decided to go out with colleagues to a local club after work to take her mind off her marital problems. On Friday evening, April 15, 2016, 28-year-old Elizabeth went out with her friends to a fun spot. She had a great time dancing, but didn't drink alcohol because she had driven her car to the club and planned to drive home. After a successful night out, Elizabeth returned home well past midnight on April 16th, parking her car outside her house. She then phoned a friend she had been with at the club to let them know she had arrived home safely. However, despite saying she was home, Elizabeth never actually entered the house. The next morning, her mother Juanita was frantic with worry when she discovered Elizabeth was not at home. She knew her daughter had planned to spend the evening with friends, but she should have been back long before. It wasn't like Elizabeth to disappear without a word, and the fact that her car was parked outside only added to the mystery. Clearly, Elizabeth had returned from the club, but where was she now? When Juanita approached the car, she was shocked to find it unlocked with the key still in the ignition. Her daughter's purse and phone were on the seat, indicating that something was seriously wrong. Juanita immediately called the police to report her daughter, Elizabeth, missing. The police were hopeful they could quickly solve the case, given the leads they had. There was no sign of struggle or blood in the car, suggesting Elizabeth might still be alive. However, to move forward, they needed to piece together a detailed timeline of Elizabeth's movements that evening. To start, the police interviewed Elizabeth's friends and colleagues, who confirmed the time she left their gathering and later spoke with her when she arrived home safely. The police also found several calls and messages from Elizabeth's ex-husband, Rudolph Arellano, on her phone, which showed he had tried contacting her multiple times that night. The police went to Rudolph's house to investigate his whereabouts on the previous evening and night. Rudolph claimed he had spoken to his ex-wife, Elizabeth, the night before, and she had promised to bring their children to him for the weekend. However, she stopped answering his calls, leading him to believe she had changed her mind. The police found Rudolph's alibi suspicious. He said he had been at a local bar with a friend that evening and returned home around midnight. While his friend and other patrons confirmed he was at the bar, no one could verify where he went after leaving. Since Rudolph lived alone, there was no one to confirm he went home, making it difficult for the police to rule him out as a suspect. The police were intrigued by Rudolph's calm demeanor, given that his ex-wife was missing and they were in the process of divorce. Despite being married for many years and Elizabeth being the mother of his children, Rudolph seemed unaffected by her disappearance, which only added to the suspicions surrounding him. On the night a young mother vanished, a fisherman phoned emergency services to report a bizarre event. He was sitting alone on a bridge that spans an interstate highway, fishing, when at around 4:30 a.m., he witnessed a car drive onto the bridge, stop, and then the driver throw a large object, resembling a person, into the water. From his distance, he couldn't see details, but it seemed like something heavy and bulky was tied to the person. The darkness and strong wind on the bridge prevented him from seeing the car's make and number or hearing any sounds. Shortly after, a second witness came forward, who was walking his dog near the bridge. Although he didn't see what happened on the bridge, a distressing scream caught his attention, followed by something large falling from the bridge and a subsequent splash, then silence. Based on the witnesses' accounts, the police decided to investigate the pond near the bridge. A few hours later, divers discovered a body with a large concrete block tied to its neck with a rope. The body of Elizabeth Arellano, a missing woman, was found drowned. A passerby and a fisherman's testimonies helped locate her body, which would have likely gone undiscovered due to the strong tidal currents that prevented it from floating. An initial theory suggested that Elizabeth might have voluntarily ended her life due to family problems. However, this was quickly dismissed as it contradicted the witness account of someone throwing her into the water. Her relatives also confirmed that Elizabeth had big plans for her life and would never abandon her children and parents. The forensic medical results and a man's testimony, who heard Elizabeth's desperate screams as she was thrown off the bridge, revealed that she was still alive when a piece of concrete was tied to her neck. She subsequently suffocated to death. The brutal murder of Elizabeth, a mother of many, has left investigators baffled as to who could have committed such a heinous crime. Robbery has been ruled out as a motive, as none of her belongings were taken. Instead, it's possible that the killer may have stalked her from a club she visited or lay in wait for her at her home. Elizabeth's ex-husband, Rudolph, has denied any involvement in the crime, claiming he was at home sleeping on the night of the murder. However, investigators are not convinced, as he has no alibi and his behavior has raised suspicions. At his ex-wife's funeral, Rudolph appeared grief-stricken, saying he wished he could have died in her place. He even helped set up a charity to raise funds for her farewell ceremony, which seemed to convince his sister of his sincerity. However, when questioned again after the funeral, Rudolph's demeanor had drastically changed, as if nothing had happened. A review of CCTV footage has revealed a new lead. A car similar to Rudolph's was seen leaving Elizabeth's parents' house around 3 a.m. on the night of her murder. The neighbor remembered seeing the car parked near the deceased's house on the road. Similarly, another neighbor saw the car parked nearby. Significantly, it was discovered that the car later drove towards the bridge where the victim was thrown. This detail sparked many questions. When the investigation examined Rudolph's cell phone data for the night of the crime, the questions multiplied. The records showed that he made multiple calls, first near Elizabeth's workplace and then near his in-laws' home. Additionally, he sent several messages to his ex-wife, trying to find out when she would return, but received no response. It appears that he had been tracking her movements and eventually decided to wait for her return at her parents' house. The police gathered sufficient evidence to arrest Rudolph as the main suspect and take him in for further investigation. A crucial witness in the case was Rudolph's eldest son, who shared vital information with the authorities. When shown the rope found around his mother's neck, the boy recalled seeing it in his father's backyard, where he had played with it earlier. Additionally, the boy identified a piece of concrete from their garden, which had appeared after the fence was replaced. Significantly, small fragments of this concrete were discovered in the trunk of Rudolph's car. The investigation revealed that Rudolph had waited for his ex-wife at her parents' home, abducted her, and prevented her from entering the house. Rudolph Arellano kidnapped his ex-wife by forcing her into his car, where he had already prepared rope and concrete in the trunk. He then drove to a bridge, intending to kill her without being noticed. However, his plan was foiled when her body was later recovered from a lake. Arellano was arrested 10 days later, but initially denied any involvement in the crime, claiming he was at home on the night of the murder. Despite the overwhelming evidence and eyewitness testimony against him, Arellano maintained his innocence. However, faced with the possibility of the death penalty, he took his lawyer's advice and confessed to the crime. He cooperated with the investigation in hopes of reducing his sentence. It wasn't until January 2019 that Arellano pleaded guilty in court and provided a detailed account of how he kidnapped and murdered his ex-wife, the mother of their 4 children. The courtroom drama was intense, with Juanita, one of his daughters, fainting upon hearing his confession. His other daughters, Alessandra and Giovanna, were devastated, calling their sister's killer a monster. Rudolph showed no remorse or guilt for his actions, speaking about the murder in a cold and detached manner. He did not apologize or provide a motive for the crime. As a result, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite considering the sentence too lenient, Elizabeth's family chose to forgive Rudolph, as they did not want to be consumed by hatred. Her parents and sisters took on the responsibility of raising Elizabeth's children. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Cassandra Cantrell. Cassandra and her twin brother Rob shared a unique bond, fueled by their love of scary stories. As kids, they'd spend hours in a darkened room, taking turns telling each other spine-tingling tales. Rob fancied himself a master storyteller, but Cassandra would always scream at the end of each story, teasing him about not being scary enough. They'd also watch Scooby-Doo together, debating which characters might be ghosts or vampires in disguise. Cassandra's instincts often proved correct, leaving Rob on edge. Their mother, Mary Smith, encouraged their love of reading by buying them books by Robert Wall. What started as a childhood hobby evolved into a lifelong passion for horror. As adults, they even collected villain figurines and considered opening a horror-themed store. An interest in horror movies brought Cassandra to the set in 2004. She got a cameo in a scary movie that, although it didn't become popular, still caused a storm of envy and led Rob to start asking his sister to make a deal for him. He asked her if she had made some acquaintances there and said he was ready to play anyone. He urged her to talk, adding that he was pretty close with the head of the cast and maybe something would come out of it, but he made no promises. Cassandra replied that she had gotten the part by accident herself. Rob was very happy, but despite his enthusiasm, he was not able to play, even in an episodic role. The lead actor in the movie was Colin Dudley, and on set, he and the debutante actress felt an undeniable chemistry. However, neither of them dared to take the first step. That was until they attended a corporate Halloween party together. Cassandra dressed up as Velma from Scooby-Doo, while Colin went as Alex from A Clockwork Orange. The costume held a deeper significance for Colin than just a simple character. It seemed to resonate with him on a deeper level. He had been walking with a glass of milk all evening, looking at everyone with a glare, just as his character had done in the movie. He had also quoted a lot from the book. For example, he had looked at Cassandra with delight and had said that beauty invariably caused his only desire to destroy it, for it did not fit at all into their ugly world. Cassandra had thought it was a compliment, and they had soon started dating, but their relationship had not lasted long, only a couple of months. Colin had found another actress, Rebecca, and had started dating her, and later on, the couple had started living together. On August 25, 2020, Cassandra Cantrell vanished without warning. She drove away from home in an unknown direction and failed to respond to phone calls. When her mother, Mary Smith, reported her disappearance to the police, they were initially reluctant to take action, suggesting that Cassandra might simply be out with friends and would turn up soon. But Mary was convinced that something was seriously wrong and pressed the police to investigate. It took 2 days for them to begin searching for Cassandra, and on the third day, they found her car parked under a bridge in a notorious neighborhood known for its high crime rate and homeless population. The car was unlocked and the keys were still inside. The discovery raised more questions than answers. Why was Cassandra in this dangerous area known for its frequent violent crimes and drug-related deaths? The police had to canvass the neighborhood, questioning homeless individuals who, unsurprisingly, were hesitant to cooperate with the authorities. The residents living under the bridge, who spent their days drinking, had no information about Cassandra's whereabouts or when her car arrived. This lack of knowledge was hardly surprising. The detective in charge of searching for Cassandra had obtained her cell phone billing records, as per protocol, but based on his experience, he doubted it would lead to any useful leads, and indeed, it didn't. The signal from Cassandra's phone indicated it was in the nearby body of water under the bridge. Unfortunately, this meant the detectives would be unable to retrieve the phone and access the crucial information it held. Prior to conducting a thorough search of the coastal area, a team of divers stood on the shore and tested the distance they could throw rocks into the water. This test would help them gauge the likelihood of finding the phone. Cassandra's mother had mentioned that her daughter's phone case was adorned with distinctive rhinestones, making it easier to spot. As it turned out, the phone was soon found, but sadly, Cassandra's body was not in the water. While the detectives presented this as a positive development, Cassandra's mother remained distraught and unconsoled. She seemed to have gotten used to the idea that her daughter was dead, and the only thing she wanted was for her body to be found and for the nightmare of uncertainty to end. She sadly mentioned that she had been looking forward to her granddaughter, wanted to be a grandmother sooner, and didn't even have time to give her a crib, which was just sitting in the garage in a box. She wondered what she should do with it now, not realizing that this became important information for the investigation. According to statistics, a large number of crimes against pregnant women are committed by their partners. However, Mary Smith's daughter, Cassandra, was not married and did not have a partner. Despite her age, Cassandra was not in a relationship with anyone. Mary was puzzled because Cassandra had gotten pregnant, but she had no information about the baby's father. Cassandra had been in frequent contact with someone, often calling and messaging them. However, the phone number of this person was not recorded in Cassandra's phone book, and Mary couldn't remember the number. This lack of information left Mary in the dark about the identity of her future grandchild's father. Cassandra frequently communicated with a person without saving their number, which was unusual. Typically, girls couldn't keep their relationships completely secret and would confide in at least one friend, especially when it came to sensitive topics like pregnancy. In this case, the friend was acquainted with police officers. In conversation with the police, Cassandra revealed that she had reunited with her former boyfriend, Colin Dudley. Although their initial relationship in 2004 was brief, it was surprising that they reconnected after 15 years apart. What was even more unexpected was that Colin, with whom Cassandra worked on a movie set in 2014, was the one who reached out to her. Colin reached out to Cassandra on Facebook, expressing condolences and sharing the recent loss of his father, with whom his wife Rebecca had a troubled history. Cassandra, motivated by kindness, agreed to meet Colin to offer comfort, but their encounter blossomed into a romantic connection. From 2014 onwards, Colin led a double life, juggling 2 families, with Cassandra as his mistress. When Cassandra discovered she was pregnant, she chose not to inform Colin, recalling his earlier statement that he didn't want children and was happy with Rebecca's infertility. Fearful that revealing the pregnancy would disrupt his primary family, Cassandra kept the news secret. However, as her belly grew, it became increasingly difficult to conceal. To avoid arousing Colin's suspicion, Cassandra stopped seeing him. Cassandra knew she couldn't keep her secret hidden forever. Lying about having another boyfriend would hurt Colin and lead to their breakup. So she made the difficult decision to tell him the truth. She was pregnant with his child. Over the phone, Colin initially remained silent, but then surprisingly expressed his delight at the news. Cassandra believed he was genuinely happy about it. Meanwhile, a detective arrived at Colin's house and knocked on the door. Colin's wife answered, and the detective, not wanting to discuss Colin's missing mistress in front of her, introduced himself as an old friend of Dudley's, avoiding any awkwardness. Colin quickly left the house with the detective, shutting the door behind him, and walked away from the house without even waiting for an introduction. He seemed to have been expecting their meeting. Colin thanked the detective for being discreet about his credentials in front of Rebecca. He spoke in short sentences, explaining that he had heard Cassandra was missing and found it extremely strange. He admitted he couldn't even guess where she might have gone. He told the detective that Cassandra had confided in him about her fight with her brother and was worried about it. He had advised her to make amends, but didn't know if she had taken his advice. The detective already knew about the fight between Cassandra and her brother, Rob, who had spoken to him about it. Rob had refused to meet with Cassandra on the day she disappeared, which he now regretted. Colin blamed himself for not being able to prevent her disappearance, thinking that if she had visited him that day, she might still be safe. Colin confessed to the detective that he wasn't a good person and acknowledged his past mistakes. He had secretly dated his ex-girlfriend, Cassandra, while still married to Rebecca, knowing it was wrong. He believed that his actions would have consequences in the afterlife, but insisted that he couldn't help who he fell in love with. After his father's death in 2014, Colin resumed his relationship with Cassandra, fulfilling one of his father's wishes. He had broken up with her soon after Christmas, which his father had criticized him for. His father had liked Cassandra, unlike Rebecca, whom he hated. Colin explained that living a double life for 5 years had been exhausting and guilt-ridden. He made excuses to hide his late-night returns, pretending to go on business trips or fishing, which he despised. He even bought fish to deceive Rebecca, who would cook them, despite the smell making him sick. Colin mentioned that Cassandra was pregnant, but didn't know who the father was. He heard from a close friend that Cassandra claimed the baby was his, which he found hard to believe. Lately, Cassandra had been avoiding him, and he understood why, as she wanted a family, something he couldn't provide. The detective asked Colin when he last saw Cassandra, and he replied that he couldn't remember, guessing it was around 3 to 4 months ago, except for a brief encounter at the mall when his wife was in the fitting room. Colin asked the detective if they thought they would find Cassandra alive, and the detective assured him they were doing everything possible. However, this wasn't Colin's last encounter with the detective. The police discovered that Colin was the owner of the unsigned phone number Cassandra's mother had mentioned. It turned out that Cassandra had frequently called Colin, including on the day she disappeared. Additionally, CCTV footage from the train station near the bridge where her car was found showed a suspicious man on the platform. The suspect wore a disguise, covering his face and head, making it impossible to identify him. However, the detective noticed that the man's gait and hat were eerily similar to those of Colin Dudley and Alex from A Clockwork Orange. The detectives followed the suspect through CCTV cameras, watching as he entered a cafe, left, and drove away in a car with a license plate registered to Colin Dudley. Armed with a search warrant, the police searched Colin's house, hoping to find Cassandra alive in the basement. Initially, they found no evidence of a crime, but they did discover the hat Colin had worn as a disguise. In the basement, a service dog trained to detect blood scents began barking, suggesting something was amiss. Colin claimed innocence, stating that the police were trying to frame him due to a lack of evidence and suspects. His wife was shocked and upset, but when asked if she thought her husband was capable of murder, she hesitated before saying no. Despite the circumstantial evidence, there wasn't enough to imprison Colin, frustrating Rob and Mary Smith and leaving the detective feeling helpless. Colin was questioned again, and he provided an alibi, stating that he had visited a hardware store on the morning of August 25th to buy cleaning supplies and trash bags. However, the large trash bags raised suspicions. The police also discovered a deleted text message from Cassandra stating that she was approaching Colin's house. Additionally, phone records showed that the couple hadn't left the house for hours that morning. Colin had turned off his phone, but accidentally left Cassandra's phone on, allowing the police to track his movements, including his presence on CCTV cameras. After the murder, Colin went to a cafe to clean up, then drove to the pond where he had thrown away Cassandra's phone, which the police had tracked to its last signal. Now, the police needed to find Cassandra's body. To retrace Colin's route, the police took a GPS tracker from his car, which showed that it had followed the same path as Cassandra's phone. The next day, the police followed Colin's path through the woods and found a large trash can tied with ropes in a ravine. The area around it was covered in blood, and it was clear what was inside. After a month, identifying the body was difficult, but the police were able to do so thanks to a tattoo described in the missing persons report. Colin was arrested and charged with murder. A forensic examination revealed that Cassandra died from a fractured skull caused by blunt force trauma. The police also found traces of blood in the basement of the Dudley house that couldn't be fully cleaned. Rebecca, Colin's wife, had been in a different part of the house and hadn't heard anything. She also revealed that Colin had never wanted children and had lied about her infertility. The police considered this a motive for the crime. During the trial, due to a lack of witnesses and physical evidence, the jury couldn't be convinced that Colin had committed the murder. So, the court offered Colin a deal. If he pleaded guilty, he would get a shorter sentence. Colin was sentenced to 26 years in prison. Cassandra's mother and brother were devastated, feeling guilty that they hadn't met with Cassandra before her death, and that the killer would likely be released one day. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jake Wagner. Hannah Mae Roden, 13, met 18-year-old Edward Jake Wagner, and they became inseparable after he invited her to prom. While their love was palpable, their significant age difference raised concerns. Despite this, their parents did not intervene in their relationship. As time passed, the Roden and Wagner families grew close, often spending weekends and attending parties together. The young couple's love was carefree and passionate. When Hannah turned 15, she revealed her pregnancy, which thrilled Jake. He expected his family to be delighted with the news, as they valued tradition and family lineage. The Wagners saw the baby as a way to continue their family name, which was passed down through generations. In contrast, the Rodens had a more modest approach to family, but still prioritized their children. Hannah's parents, Christopher and Dana, remained devoted to their 3 kids despite their divorce. The Roden family's income was modest, unlike the Wagners. To celebrate Sophie's birthday, a grand party was organized shortly after. Jake proposed that Hannah move in with him and his family, claiming it would make life easier for both of them. However, Hannah refused, having come to realize that Jake was trying to control her and limit her independence. This was partly due to Jake's increasing aggression and suspicious behavior, which had already led to physical altercations on several occasions. Hannah's rejection sparked tension between the Wagners, with each of Sophie's parents determined to gain full custody of Sophie. Driven by their own interests, the families began to advocate for their own rights. Jake's anger towards Hannah peaked when she refused to sign a document granting him and his brother full custody. He even threatened her, accusing her of hiding secrets. The situation escalated when Hannah announced her second pregnancy. Although she claimed the child was fathered by another man, Jake was skeptical. In December 2015, he hacked into Hannah's social media accounts to uncover evidence of infidelity, but found none. Instead, he discovered her communication with Georgia Fort's former mother-in-law, which sparked his interest. A court case was soon to follow as a result. During a court hearing to decide where their granddaughter Sophie would live, Christopher Roden and George Wagner III got into a serious argument. This dispute marked the beginning of the end for the relationship between the two families. The Wagner family soon became convinced that Hannah, Sophie's mother, was an obstacle and that they needed to eliminate her and the entire Roden family, who could potentially gain custody of Sophie. This disturbing idea evolved into a sinister plan by Christmas 2016. While many people were celebrating the festive season with love and kindness, the Wagners held a chilling family vote to decide whether to carry out their plan. Every family member agreed to go ahead, and they began assigning roles and making preparations. Over the next 5 months, they secretly observed the Roden homes, studying their daily routines, work schedules, and surveillance cameras. On the night of April 21, 2016, George Wagner III visited Christopher Roden under the guise of offering him a job to improve his finances. This was just a ruse to get into the house. The next evening, around 8 p.m., Christopher Roden Sr. answered the door, unaware of the danger lurking. Earlier that day, Bobby Jo Manley, Dana Roden's sister, had stopped by Christopher's trailer to care for the family's animals, as she did daily since he had offered her a job. However, she noticed someone was inside, which was unusual at that time of day. Alarmed, she called emergency services, reporting what she saw and requesting help at 477 Union Hill Road. Panicked, Bobby rushed to the neighboring homes of relatives, loudly knocking on their doors. At one of the homes, she found a 3-year-old boy, Clarence's son, who didn't respond to her questions about his parents' whereabouts, only pointing towards the bed. Following the incident, the surviving children were placed in the care of relatives. The neighborhood was gripped by fear, and the police advised the Roden relatives to take precautions and warned all Pike residents to stay indoors at night. After a brutal mass murder shocked the state, the public demanded a swift and transparent investigation, urging authorities to catch the perpetrators as soon as possible. In response, businessman Jeff Ruby offered a $25,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of those responsible. However, he later withdrew the offer. An investigative task force of at least 100 individuals was formed to work on the case. Following the funerals, investigators took possession of the slain family's 3 trailers and several vehicles, transporting them to a secure facility to preserve evidence and protect the victims' belongings. The plan was to return the family's cars and farming equipment to their relatives after the investigation. Forensic experts joined the inquiry, meticulously examining the trailers, but no suspect DNA was found. Although cameras had been installed in the mobile homes, they had been disabled, leaving no useful footage. The perpetrators had clearly planned every detail carefully. Just when it seemed like there were no significant leads, detectives made a breakthrough discovery. Cannabis crops were found at 3 crime scenes. In one location, police found around 200 cannabis plants, leading them to suspect the drugs were being grown for sale, not personal use. This raised questions about potential involvement with Mexican drug traffickers, but the amount of cannabis found was too small to imply involvement with an entire cartel. A relative of the Roden family was arrested for drug trafficking in January 2017, but this was considered a coincidence. Leonard Manley, the father of Dana Roden, denied his daughter's involvement in the cannabis operation, saying that they were trying to drag Dana through the mud, and he didn't like it. Some family members confirmed that Christopher and Kenneth Roden, the older brothers, grew marijuana, but they were unaware of any large-scale operation. The theory that a family feud over illegally obtained money was behind the murders was also disproven. At the Rodens' property, authorities discovered not only banned substances, but also specialized equipment used for breeding fighting chickens and cages containing animals trained for combat. Although these findings initially led investigators to suspect illegal animal fights might be connected to the homicide, it soon became apparent that this was not the case. Despite months of investigation, the true motive behind the crime remained a mystery. By April 13, 2017, local authorities officially announced that they lacked sufficient evidence to make any arrests. However, prosecutor Rob Young insisted that the investigation was still active, implying that they had some promising leads that they were not yet ready to reveal. As the second anniversary of the mass crime approached, the case received little attention from the local media, and neither the sheriff nor the prosecutor attended the memorial service, leading the community to suspect that the investigation had stalled. On May 12, 2017, a surprising turn of events occurred when a SWAT team raided a home in Pike County, just 10 miles from the scene of the crime. Initially, they were looking for suspects, but it was later revealed that their true intention was to gather evidence. Additionally, detectives searched a house in Adams County that had previously belonged to Jake Wagner, although he had already sold it by that time. Approximately a month later, on June 20, 2017, the focus of the investigation officially shifted towards the Wagner family. 26-year-old Jake, 27-year-old George III, 47-year-old George IV, and 48-year-old Angela, who lived 15 miles from the victims, were under scrutiny. The Wagners had moved to Alaska, citing difficulties staying in the area, claiming to have loved the Roden family and stating their deaths caused them immense suffering. Rob Young's words from a year earlier proved true, as the investigation had made a breakthrough and was now seeking information from the public on the Wagners' discussions about firearms, ammunition, vehicles, etc. 2 years prior, it wasn't long before the suspects, running low on funds, returned to Ohio, where detectives had gathered enough evidence for arrests, including proving Jake had hacked into Hannah's account during the examination of the Wagner family's devices. Search queries related to guardianship were discovered. It was also found that Angela had purchased sneakers for the entire family just a few weeks before the crime. The tread pattern of one of these matched that found in one of the trailers. Officers believed Angela was the mastermind behind the horrific scheme, with Jake as the primary executive. According to the investigation, each family member was involved in the criminal act. On November 13, 2018, the Attorney General announced the arrest of the Wagner couple, as well as their sons, who were charged with planning and carrying out the termination of life. Rita Newcomb, Angela's 65-year-old mother, and Frida Wagner, George III's mother, were arrested and charged with perjury and obstructing justice. In 2019, Rita Newcomb underwent handwriting analysis, which proved her involvement in forging a document related to Sophie's guardianship. She struck a plea deal to avoid imprisonment. The charges against Frida Wagner were later dropped in June 2019. The other Wagners refused to cooperate with the investigation and denied any involvement in the Rodens' deaths, expressing sorrow and wishing for the real perpetrators to be caught. However, in April 2021, 5 years after the incident, Jake Wagner decided to make a deal with the prosecution. Under the agreement, he would provide details of the crime in exchange for life sentences for all family members instead of the death penalty. Jake Wagner Jr. admitted to killing 5 people and pleaded guilty to 23 criminal charges, including aggravated murder, burglary, conspiracy, and other crimes. To ensure his daughter Hannah wouldn't be taken away, he thought killing her mother was the only solution. He believed that if he didn't also kill the Rodens, they would seek revenge and fight for custody of Hannah. Angela, who had been involved in the conspiracy, pleaded guilty to several charges on September 10th, including conspiracy, robbery, and evidence tampering. In exchange for her cooperation, the charge of murder was dropped. She received a 30-year prison sentence. George Wagner IV went on trial on August 28, 2022. Despite denying any involvement in the crimes, Claiming he was unaware of what was happening, the prosecution presented evidence of his role in planning, executing, and covering up the crimes. He was found guilty on 22 counts and sentenced to life in prison without parole. George Wagner III's trial is set for February 2024. Despite his family members being convicted, he still maintains his innocence, but likely faces the same fate as his son. The once peaceful relationship between the Wagners and Rodins ended in tragedy, driven by a collective and incomprehensible madness. The consequences of their actions left 3 children without parents. As Sophie grows up, she will one day realize what happened, and it's hard to imagine how she will cope with that knowledge. The Wagners' bitter custody battle had a devastating impact on her, denying her the love and support of her parents, relatives, and a stable upbringing. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Celeste Mano. Celeste Mano was born on November 30th, 1997 in northeastern Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. She was the youngest of 2 children to Eggy Diro and Tony Mano, with an older brother named Alessandro. Although her parents divorced when she and her brother were young, her father remained involved in their lives, providing financial support and staying in touch. During her school years, Celeste was outgoing, active, and popular. She participated in sports and dance, led the cheerleading team, and had ambitious plans for her future. Initially, she aimed to become a lawyer and enrolled at the University of Melbourne to study criminal and civil law. However, as she neared graduation, she found law unfulfilling and switched her focus to advertising and marketing. In 2018, she landed a job at a large e-commerce company that sold various products online. Celeste, a highly intelligent and talented individual, rapidly advanced in her career, going from a call center worker to a department head in under 2 years. Her exceptional abilities, initiative, and organizational skills earned her widespread admiration from colleagues. Besides her professional prowess, Celeste was also known for her stunning physical appearance, having been a participant in her university's beauty contest. With many admirers since her youth, Celeste was cautious in selecting partners. One such admirer was Lou Nader, a 16-year-older colleague who showed strong interest in her from the moment she joined the company. Notably, Lou was a reserved and unsociable person who lacked career ambitions, content with his long-held minor position. Celeste, a kind and smiling person, consistently turned down Louis's requests to go out with her, always doing so politely to avoid hurting his feelings. Despite this, Louis continued to try to get her attention through various means. To lighten the mood, Celeste would occasionally make jokes, but she remained firm in her decision to not pursue anything with him. Louis, however, misinterpreted her behavior as a challenge and believed that Celeste was simply playing hard to get, vowing to win her over no matter what. Louis's persistent attention was awkward, annoying, and refused to fade. Celeste maintained her composure, hoping that he would eventually lose interest or focus on someone else. However, as time went on, Louis became increasingly obsessed with Celeste, and his infatuation did not go unnoticed by those around them. One day, Celeste confided in a close friend and colleague that she would never consider a relationship with Louis, citing 3 reasons: his peculiar and unpredictable nature, his lack of ambition and life goals, and their significant age difference. Celeste's admirer, Louis, made the fatal mistake of neglecting his work duties in his fruitless attempts to win her attention and affection. As a result, his productivity plummeted, and he received 3 reprimands and warnings from senior management. Eventually, he was dismissed from his job in early autumn 2019. When Louis was fired, he was devastated and on the verge of tears as he packed up his belongings in the office. Celeste, on the other hand, felt relieved that the unwanted suitor would no longer be a nuisance, but she also felt guilty, thinking that her rejection had contributed to his downfall. Mano, the department manager, thanked Louis for his years of service, escorted him out of the building, and offered him words of encouragement and luck before parting ways. Louis misinterpreted Celeste's reaction to his sudden kiss as a sign that she had feelings for him, despite her clear discomfort. He convinced himself that she was hesitant to pursue an office romance due to her position as his boss, and that their social differences were the only obstacle to their happiness. Emboldened by this mistaken belief, Louis decided to take matters into his own hands. After being fired, he created a social media account, found Celeste's profile, and sent her a friend request. When she initially accepted, he began sending her multiple requests to meet up, which she first tried to politely decline before eventually blocking him. Celeste's former colleague sent her another friend request on social media, this time from a new profile. Despite her attempts to ignore him, he began commenting on her photos, complimenting her appearance, and suggesting they would make a great couple. She tried to limit her profile settings to prevent this, but a week later, she was still harassed. During a family gathering, Celeste confided in her relatives about the unwelcome attention, sharing the strange incident that occurred on the day he was fired. Her family listened, but they didn't take it seriously, assuming the admirer would eventually lose interest and leave her alone. What they didn't know was that the harassment was about to escalate. Although Lou didn't have Celeste's personal phone number, she started receiving romantic messages from an unknown number. She knew exactly who was behind them. The unwanted admirer sent her romantic poems, admired her beauty, and continued to try to convince her to go out with him. Mano received repetitive calls from her stalker, and she decided to answer once to have a direct conversation with him. She explained that there was no possibility of a relationship between them and asked him to stop contacting her. However, the stalker ignored her words and instead complimented her voice, expressing his happiness that she had finally answered his call. After this incident, Mano tried to block his number, but the stalker continued to harass her by calling from different numbers. This pattern of harassment persisted for months, during which Mano attempted to ignore him by blocking his numbers and fake social media profiles and not responding to his messages. She tried to maintain her daily routine, but the stalker's messages continued, transitioning from romantic to bold and threatening in nature. Eventually, the stalker's messages evolved from requests to demands, as he insisted on meeting Mano and sharing his delusional fantasies about what he would do to her. Celeste's situation took a dark turn when she discovered that her stalker, Louis, had started following her from work to her home, learning her address. At first, she didn't realize that Louis was physically present in her life, not just sending messages. She would occasionally catch glimpses of him near her home, but convinced herself it was just her imagination and paranoia. It wasn't until she finally acknowledged the truth that Louis was indeed following her every move, driven by his obsessive behavior. Celeste then sought police protection, requesting a restraining order to keep the stalker away from her and her home. However, the police were uncooperative and dismissive of her concerns. According to them, Louis hadn't broken any laws since writing poems and sharing explicit fantasies and messages wasn't illegal. Without concrete evidence of Louis's stalking, the police brushed her off, telling her to leave the precinct and let them focus on catching real criminals. A restraining order was finally issued against Sacco, prohibiting him from contacting Celeste in any way. At first, he respected the order and disappeared from her life for a few weeks, giving Celeste a sense of freedom and relief. However, her peace was short-lived. Less than a month later, she started receiving messages from unknown numbers. Sacco was pleading and then demanding that she drop the restraining order, claiming it was interfering with their supposed romantic relationship. Celeste immediately reported these messages to the police, as Sacco was violating the restraining order. As a result, he was fined and warned that further violations would lead to harsher consequences, including possible jail time. After this incident, Sacco remained quiet for almost 2 months, leading Celeste to believe he had finally left her alone. During this time, Celeste met Chris Riedale, a young man who shared her interests, values, and goals. They quickly formed a romantic connection. Celeste opened up to her new boyfriend, Chris, about the harassment she had suffered at the hands of a former admirer. Although it had been over a month since she last heard from him, she still felt anxious about the situation. Chris was supportive and reassuring, doing everything he could to make her feel safe and cared for. As their relationship progressed, Celeste felt comfortable enough to introduce Chris to her family at a dinner gathering in early November. Her family welcomed him with open arms, and her mother even joked that Celeste was now in good hands. The next few weeks were peaceful, with no signs of the former admirer. Celeste was happy and carefree, spending all her free time with Chris. On November 15, 2020, the couple went on a date to a cafe where they enjoyed each other's company and decided to capture the moment by taking a selfie. The photo of the couple turned out to be very romantic, showing them sitting together, embracing and smiling happily. Celeste was so fond of this picture that she decided to use it as her social media profile picture, also wanting to share the news of her new relationship and indicate that things were getting serious. Chris also shared the photo on his page, accompanied by a heartfelt caption expressing his love for Celeste and his desire to keep her happy. However, this outing would be the couple's last. Tragedy struck on the evening of their last date. After Chris dropped Celeste off at her home, they said their goodbyes and planned to meet again the next day. Celeste spent about an hour chatting with her mother in the kitchen about her boyfriend before going to bed, as she had to wake up early for work the next morning. But on November 16, 2020, around 4 a.m., disaster struck when Eggy was awakened by the sound of breaking glass. Eggy was awoken by suspicious noises, followed by banging, screams, and commotion. At first, she thought the sounds were coming from outside, but soon realized they were inside her house. Panicked, she rushed to her daughter Celeste's room, throwing on her robe and jumping out of bed. When she opened the door, she saw someone fleeing the room through the broken window. She turned on the light to find her daughter lying in a pool of blood, covered in cuts and tiny shards of glass. Celeste struggled to breathe, her eyes wide open and staring upward. Eggy called emergency services and tried to stop the bleeding, but it was too late. By the time the police and doctors arrived, Celeste had passed away. The autopsy revealed over 20 stab wounds on her body with a fatal blow to her heart. The police investigation concluded that the attack took less than 3 minutes, from the assailant breaking in through the window to the moment Eggy entered the room. Celeste was attacked with a large butcher's knife, and her attempts to defend herself left her arms with multiple cuts. When investigators asked her mother, Eggy, if Celeste had any enemies, she mentioned Louis Sacco, who had been stalking and harassing Celeste for over a year with frequent calls and threatening messages. Other family members, friends, and colleagues confirmed this information. At the crime scene, the attacker left behind a large number of bloody fingerprints and DNA evidence on a fence he jumped over while fleeing, which also indicated that he had injured his hand. It was crucial to detain and question Louis immediately as the prime suspect and to verify all the evidence and witness statements. Louis was arrested on the same day, but he initially denied any involvement, claiming that he loved Celeste and would never harm her. However, forensic results soon confirmed that the bloody fingerprints found in Celeste's room and on the fence belonged to Louis. Additionally, law enforcement discovered that Louis had violated a restraining order, preventing him from approaching Celeste. Furthermore, surveillance footage showed that Louis had purchased a hammer and a large knife at a local hardware store on the evening before the attack. Louis committed a horrific crime. He used a hammer to break into a woman's house through her window and then fatally attacked her with a knife. Louis bought a knife and a hammer and then waited until nighttime to carry out his attack on Celeste's home. His actions seemed deliberate and premeditated, yet his behavior was also erratic, raising questions about his mental health. Notably, the 39-year-old man had never been married, still lived with his parents, had few friends, and struggled to hold down a job. Louis was a nervous and introverted individual who struggled with social interactions. He also had a biological brother who was currently serving a long prison sentence for a crime. As a result, the court ordered a forensic psychiatric evaluation for Louis. His attorney argued that instead of imprisonment, Louis needed specialized treatment to address his mental health issues, which required professional attention. The victim's family was outraged by the argument that the criminal, Louis, might avoid punishment by claiming insanity. However, psychiatric experts concluded that although Louis suffered from mental disorders, he was fully aware of his actions during the crime and had even planned it in advance. As a result, Louis was forced to stand trial, where he continued to claim that he was mentally ill and not responsible for his actions. Despite his efforts, the jury found him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to 36 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. The case highlighted the need for reform in Victoria's criminal laws, particularly regarding online stalking. Celeste, the victim, had reported Louis to the police in 2020, but her complaint was not taken seriously because the law did not consider online harassment a crime. Her mother, Eggy, worked tirelessly to develop Celeste's law, which would have introduced criminal liability for stalking on social networks. Although Eggy presented over 40 recommendations to the Legislative Commission, almost all were rejected. Research showed that most online stalkers do not escalate their behavior, and the resulting amendments only restricted access to confidential social media information and allowed restraining orders in severe cases. Unfortunately, stalkers still faced no criminal liability, and Celeste's law was never enacted.